faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, the book we're discussing for you is Our Inner Conflicts. Each of us experiences inner conflicts constantly. For example, when choosing a college major, do we pick what interests us or what has good job prospects? After turning 30, do we continue to enjoy the freedom of single life or pair up like others to find support? After having children, should we spend more time with them or work hard in our careers to earn tuition? Many times, we're torn between listening to others or sticking to our own views. These moments of inner conflict are what this book explores. The author of this book, Karen Horney, is a renowned German-American psychologist and psychiatrist, one of the earliest advocates of social psychology and feminist psychology. She was a key figure in the psychoanalytic school and made epoch-making contributions to its theoretical development. So, Freud advocated that biology determines everything. He believed that human psychological issues are all related to biological mechanisms. For instance, many psychological problems arise from unmet sexual desires. But Horney opposed this view. She believed that people's psychological states are closely tied to their social, cultural environment. Many people develop psychological issues because of a lack of security in interpersonal relationships. Additionally, Freud emphasized the influence of early experiences, believing that many psychological issues can be traced back to one's early years. Horney, on the other hand, believed that while experiences are important, psychoanalysis should be based more on an individual's current mental state and focus on solving current problems. It can be said that Horney's views greatly advanced psychoanalysis. Her focus on social and cultural factors also made it possible to incorporate psychotherapy into social security systems. The book, Our Inner Conflicts, that we're interpreting today, is one of Karen Horney's later works, and among her most classic academic writings, that not only embodies her theories, but also includes many practical experiences. This content has epoch-making significance for the development of modern personality psychology and psychoanalytic theory and practice. So I'll combine my actual counseling work to interpret this book for you through 4 questions. First, why do inner conflicts exist? Second, what kind of psychological problems can inner conflicts cause? Third, how do people typically deal with conflicts in a natural state? Fourth, according to Horney, how should inner conflicts be resolved? So next, let's dive into the first question. Why do inner conflicts exist? On the topic of psychological conflict, Freud discussed it long ago. He believed that inner conflicts are caused purely by biological factors. In the human unconscious, there exists the life instinct and the death instinct, a pair of conflicting drives. The life instinct is a constructive force, or rather, a drive that makes one full of vitality. While the death instinct refers to destructive forces, such as aggressive impulses towards others and oneself, and the conflict between these two easily creates contradictions within people. Another psychology giant, Jung, explained inner conflicts through personality conflicts. He believed that someone who appears very introverted actually has strong extroverted traits inside. Those who always emphasize rationality are extremely emotional inside, and outwardly gentle people often hide very masculine traits. People's inner conflicts manifest as choosing between 2 completely different personalities. Which personality do they want to become their external characteristic? Our inner self has to struggle a bit. But unfortunately, Jung couldn't explain in detail how this choice is made. In Horney's view, Freud and Jung's arguments are not without merit. However, their perspectives start from the individual world. But can we really judge how to live solely by ourselves? Horney felt that to better understand our inner conflicts, we cannot ignore the social and cultural environments people are in. The reason inner conflicts arise is because there's a discrepancy between one's true inner needs and the external environment. So, for example, we often hear this question, what kind of person should I become? This question is not only about our own desires, but also related to the people around us. Those who are extremely important to us also determine how we shape ourselves. Besides, every life choice we make, whether it's what major to study, what job to take, or where to live, not only fulfills our own needs, but is also influenced by the people around us to some extent. And it's precisely these big decisions that ultimately define who we are. Therefore, Horney believes that, generally, the root of people's inner conflicts is the clash between individuals and their environment. The main way it shows up is through disruptions in interpersonal relationships. For instance, one client said he feels lost about the future and doesn't know how to decide. On one hand, he wants to pursue further studies in philosophy, but his parents keep stressing that he should find a stable job and start dating, which troubles him a lot. Um, if he lives a stable, unchanging life like his parents suggest, he resents it, but chasing his dream makes him hesitant too. As a result, he not only gets anxious and can't sleep, but his relationship with his parents becomes awkward and strained. Oh, most inner conflicts are just like this. It often, when we make a choice, it might be due to societal pressures, family expectations, or even just following a role model. However, these outside factors can pull us away from our true goals and desires. Thus, our inner conflicts are really conflicts between the individual and society, or between ourselves and others. And on a deeper level, it's the clash between who you want to be and who others expect you to be. In Horney's view, whether it reaches a mental illness level or not, every one of us has some of these psychological conflicts inside. All right, let's summarize the first part. The root of inner conflicts is the struggle between personal growth and the social environment, specifically seen in interpersonal issues, which is the core of Horney's theory. Now, let's move on to the second question. What psychological problems can inner conflicts cause? The girl rushed over to ask me, do you think I should break up? But really, the issue she brought to counseling is her conflict with her parents. The girl met a fascinating guy on a trip, and they fell in love at first sight. Recently, they became a couple, but her parents strongly oppose it, telling her, you need to find a more reliable man, at least with a good family background, excellent job, and the ability to earn money. To the girl, her parents' standards seem reasonable, aligning with mainstream societal views. But she just can't give up this love, and that's how the conflict arises. Should she fulfill her parents' wishes or follow her own heart? She's so anxious about this that she can't sleep, and the more intense the conflict, the more severe the psychological problems become. Some even develop neurosis, experiencing problems in every aspect of life. Inner conflicts can cause the first psychological problem is feeling deeply divided, wanting something intensely but not acting on it. In psychology, this is called hindered development of self identity. In other words, people can't integrate their desires, abilities, beliefs, and values into a coherent direction. The most common manifestation of inner division is being unable to decide whether to stick to what they want or conform to authoritative mainstream views, causing immense torment. They might spend half their life busy only to suddenly lose their direction. For example, a young guy always wanted to be a rapper because it seemed cool. But having the idea isn't enough. He needs to put in lots of effort and persistence. If he can't reconcile conflicts between self and others, emotion and logic, ideals and reality, he'll likely feel incapable of achieving his desired life. Then he'll start doubting whether becoming a rapper is even right for him, and this conflict will follow him into adulthood. This is why we see many 30 or 40 somethings suddenly having crises, questioning if they're living the life they want, all caused by inner conflicts. The second psychological problem is disrupted interpersonal relationships. Here's a real case. A male client whose father retired early due to health issues before achieving his career goals. The father felt deep regret about this, so he pushed his son to take over his path, but the son wanted different possibilities. Their conflicting views created inner turmoil. The father felt disappointed by unmet expectations, while the son resented being misunderstood and unacknowledged. Family relationships are getting worse and worse. In the end, this client didn't get a perfect resolution. The son was full of guilt, but they never reconciled before the father passed away. The third psychological problem is life stagnation, unable to achieve set goals, leading to self doubt. For example, a female student sought psychological counseling, saying she's about to graduate but hasn't written a word of her thesis, and she's already requested an extension once. This time, she absolutely can't delay any longer. But when she actually sits in front of the computer, she has no motivation at all and starts doubting her abilities. Um, with the counselor's help, she realized she's been troubled by inner conflicts every day. She never knew what kind of person she should be, go back home, marry a good guy, and live a routine life, or pursue her childhood dream. This conflict has actually been troubling her all along, but it was never properly addressed. Now that she's about to leave the ivory tower and face life alone, taking responsibility for her own life, this inner conflict becomes even stronger. As long as this conflict isn't resolved, she can't calm down and properly complete the tasks at hand. The fourth psychological problem is an overflow of negative emotions, which is its most direct and common impact. The female student we mentioned earlier is constantly anxious. In severe moments, she repeats certain behaviors to alleviate her bad feelings. For example, she repeatedly checks what she's written, always feeling it's not perfect, so she deletes it and starts over. This kind of problem is clinically called neurosis. Essentially, it's when people are entangled in negative emotions, like fear, despair, panic, and anxiety. For example, someone with obsessive compulsion neurosis might repeat one thing every day. This thing becomes the focus of their life, and everything else is basically paralyzed. They think repeating it will make them feel a bit better. But the reality is the opposite. Compulsive repetitive behaviors worsen, and their emotional symptoms plummet, causing extreme pain. On the surface, neurosis may bring these particularly sensational, bizarre behaviors and extremely unstable emotions. So, and every external abnormal behavior or emotion is a result of inner conflicts. All right, in the second part, we specifically discussed the psychological problems that inner conflicts can cause, including feeling divided and causing disruptions in interpersonal relationships. Additionally, inner conflicts make people doubt themselves, thus losing motivation to act. Finally, inner conflicts constantly plague us with bad emotions. So, how do people usually deal with these problems? This is the third question I'll address. This issue is also a key focus in Horney's book, because understanding whether people's efforts are effective can guide them to resolve inner conflicts more efficiently. So, Horney found that many people start with relationships. Well, why must we address inner conflicts through relationships? Here, I first need to introduce Horney's most important concept, basic anxiety. She believed human basic anxiety mainly concerns where security comes from. This basic anxiety is also the origin of people's most fundamental inner conflicts. From birth, people strive to find security. If security remains unattained, inner conflicts become increasingly evident. Earlier, we mentioned Horney was a social psychologist who valued human social attributes. He believed our social identity determines whether we feel comfortable and at peace inside. Moreover, whether we live in a hostile or friendly environment, whether we're isolated or surrounded by harmony, these social conditions also affect our sense of security. From an individual perspective, People spend their lives striving to find security in interpersonal relationships. They typically handle relationships in two ways: dealing with others and dealing with themselves. Let's first discuss coordinating relationships with others. Horney categorized relationship coordination into three basic types: moving toward people, moving against people, and moving away from people. People's different choices lead to vastly different relational experiences. Some can temporarily relieve inner anxiety through these methods, but others may develop new problems, adding fresh conflicts and worsening psychological symptoms. Let's first discuss moving toward people. Some use this approach to gain security. They're what we often call dependents, believing that being with others will resolve their inner conflicts. Now, for example, a friend once said, "I feel I'm a very easygoing person who wants to be kind. I aim to align with others, so there's no conflict. If I have to be alone, I'll go crazy." Of course, this makes him seem like a nice, approachable person in others' eyes, helping him gain and maintain security. However, this comes at a cost. The cost is giving up part of himself. For example, yielding to others' opinions. So he proudly says, "Your happiness is my greatest joy." But at the same time, he regretfully says, "Why do people think I have no personality?" And others use confrontation to resolve their basic anxiety. For example, a tough protagonist in a movie might declare, "I've been a warrior all my life." You'll find that such people usually adopt an aggressive stance towards the world and relationships. For instance, a client said, "In my eyes, love is actually a battle. The outcome is always one person loses, one wins." This mindset urges him to solve problems and assign responsibility in every conflict. On one hand, this is a very proactive state. Facing relationship challenges with full vigor daily shows strong vitality. However, his friends always ask him with concern, "Isn't this tiring?" Honestly, he sometimes finds it exhausting, especially in intimate relationships where he constantly maintains a fierce fighting spirit in front of his partner, which means he's always creating conflicts. The third way is avoiding crowds. This is especially common among young people today. Japanese psychologists even coined a new term for them. And hikikomori, with hi for retreat and komori for seclusion. The lifestyle of such people is essentially being homebound, avoiding all real communication with others. This issue is very common now. Horney observed this decades ago and considered them severe neurotics. For these people, giving up communication and isolating themselves not only avoids trouble, but mainly prevents an imbalance in inner security. If I only interact with myself, others can't disappoint me, so there's no threat to my security. Hmm. They think this is the best way to avoid inner conflicts. But from another perspective, this choice isolates them from social life and limits personal inner freedom. All right, this is the first aspect of how people deal with inner conflicts. How to resolve conflicts with others. Horney believed that to alleviate the pain caused by inner conflicts, people use three basic ways to interact with others: moving toward others, moving against others, and moving away from others. Next, let's discuss the second aspect of how people deal with inner conflicts: how to handle their relationship with themselves. One common approach is using idealization to gain a sense of self. What does this mean? Let me give you an example. One of my clients often says, "I always expect to have a perfect life." The implication is that he believes he's capable of achieving a perfect life, but this is often just his imagined self, not his true reality. Real life is full of setbacks, which easily creates a huge psychological gap for him. Therefore, to continue feeling good about himself, he has to avoid making mistakes. So, the biggest problem he faces now is procrastination. But we know it's impossible for a person not to make mistakes. Gradually, he loses the courage to start because beginning inevitably brings problems. This ultimately makes it hard for him to find motivation for even the smallest tasks. Another common situation is people avoiding reality to conceal their true difficulties, what we call burying one's head in the sand. When these people encounter problems at work or in life, their first thought is that it's all someone else's fault or the environment's fault. In psychology, we call this automatic reaction externalization. That is to say, these people find it difficult to analyze and solve problems from within themselves. Their attribution style is entirely external. Many people use this psychological mechanism to resolve inner conflicts. A woman came for counseling. As soon as she sat down, she said, "I don't think I have a problem. I just want to see how I can get my child to correct his mistakes." In the counseling room, such statements are common. Many people dare not listen to their true inner voice or face their difficulties. This mother later discovered that her core pain was actually disappointment in her marital life. But she had a hard time facing this issue, always thinking her husband was inadequate and pinning her hopes on the child instead. But the child doesn't meet her expectations as perfectly as she imagined. Clearly, years of externalization prevented her from fundamentally resolving her inner conflicts. All right, that concludes the third section. Horney found that generally, people try to manage relationships with others and themselves to eliminate inner conflicts. However, these methods only temporarily relieve problems rather than solving them completely. Conversely, rigidly applying these approaches might worsen inner conflicts, even causing psychological dysfunction and more severe mental disorders. Since self-directed methods can't fully solve the problem, how does Horney suggest resolving inner conflicts? This is the fourth question I'll address. One thing to clarify, Our Inner Conflicts is an academic book exploring psychological issues. Horney believed resolving inner conflicts isn't a closed, simple process, but rather a professional, systematic one. In other words, it's difficult for individuals to resolve their inner conflicts solely on their own. Therefore, Horney's solutions mainly target mental health professionals, but some methods can be adapted by ordinary people. First, the prerequisite for resolution is viewing inner conflicts through a social lens. That is, what is our cultural environment actually like? To what extent does it define who we are? And how much personal agency do we truly have within this broader context? For example, our society has conflicting values, collective power versus individual expression. Older generations value sacrificing personal gain for others, while younger ones prioritize personal development before caring for others. Because different generations experience distinct historical developments, such social conflicts inevitably arise, leaving marks on everyone. This becomes the source of our inner conflicts. Therefore, self-awareness alone isn't enough. Understanding societal truths is the first step to resolution. For individuals, solving personal problems requires thinking from a sociocultural perspective. And at the societal management level, addressing psychological issues and mental illnesses also requires seeking answers from the current social context. Secondly, resolving conflicts depends on our authentic understanding of ourselves, especially the courage to face our inner truths. So, what is inner truth? For example, what are our own needs and desires? Do we truly understand our strengths and weaknesses? Do we know our talents and limitations? What exactly is our emotional state at this very moment? What are we actually suffering or rejoicing about? Specifically, every psychological issue or symptom may stem from different underlying logic. Suppose 3 patients all exhibit repetitive hand washing. Their inner conflicts may differ. Some might believe dirt is wrong, unhygienic, and socially unacceptable. Others feel bacteria cause health problems and make them sick. While some think washing hands 3 times prevents misfortune, to resolve their hand-washing compulsion, we must understand their unique conflict points and how these affect their lives. Furthermore, Since psychological conflicts involve relationships, solutions must start from relational perspectives. The Hornacial psychological concept. Horney believed humans are born into a hostile world. This hostility isn't moral opposition, but rather the excessive uncertainties in our cultural environment. These factors often carry destructive potential, hindering healthy development. Thus, relational experiences often prove unsatisfactory. Examples include facing harsh authority, flawed upbringing, lack of respect, family emotional absence, or pervasive unspoken social rules, all potential sources of inner conflict. As a psychoanalyst, Horney didn't focus on what should we do. She believed resolution hinges on engaged experiencing. You might wonder, how can I experience troubled relationships positively? Horney argued relationships fail because people don't emotionally invest, forcing rationality onto problems or maintaining superficial transactional connections. For example, in intimate relationships, when mentioning breakups, we tend to focus more on what happened, like affairs, financial issues, conflicts between families of origin, differing views on child education, and so on. It seems that if practical problems can't be solved, it's hard for the couple not to separate. However, the root cause of emotional breakdown is ultimately the rupture of emotional connection between partners, which erodes the foundation for resolving practical conflicts. Moreover, this rupture might have appeared long ago but was ignored by us. Therefore, Horney advocates consciously observing how oneself and the other are in a relationship and experiencing it. He sees what internal causes lead to relationship damage, which helps us mitigate interpersonal conflicts. In short, the power of relationships provides people with the most basic sense of security. With close people, if the relationship quality is high, even if there are disagreements, we can understand each other through healthy communication. And this will further help us alleviate inner conflicts and reduce anxiety. Of course, this is a very idealized state. Besides our personal efforts, Horney believes psychological counseling and therapy can be external aids to resolve inner conflicts, helping us learn to build good relationships. In other words, anyone willing can, with the guidance of mental health professionals, discover their true self, understand inner conflicts, and ultimately rebuild rich, healthy, authentic relational experiences through interaction. Today, I've interpreted Karen Horney's work, Our Inner Conflicts, by combining specific cases from my practice. Finally, let's make a brief summary. Horney views our inner conflicts from a social psychology perspective. So he believes the essence of these conflicts is the contradiction between self-development and the environment, leading to internal and external psychological issues, such as hindered self-development, disordered relationships, self-doubt, and being plagued by negative emotions. And people will try to manage relationships with others and learn to be with themselves to resolve their inner conflicts. But Horney believes these attempts are insufficient. People can discover their true selves with the help of counselors and handle relationships. All right, that concludes our interpretation of Our Inner Conflicts for you. The reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.